Welcome to Dark Knight Films Reviews and another Versus Night. Tonight, I will be comparing Battlestar Galactica from 1978 versus Buck Rogers and the 25th Century from 1979. So, let's get started with this, with the leads. Battlestar Galactica stars Richard Hatch and Dirk Benedict. Buck Rogers stars Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray. Now, I love both of the casts in this one. Richard Hatch, basically, I know somebody might disagree with me on this one, but basically to me, Richard Hatch is playing a male version of Princess Leia in Star Wars. Whereas Dirk Benedict is basically playing a combination of Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. I mean, he's got parts of both characters in him. And that's the thing with Battlestar Galactica. As much as I love it, it is a Star Wars ripoff. Glenn A. Larson, creator of both of these shows, he's a brilliant guy as far as TV shows that were successful goes, but some of them he did basically based on a trend that was going on big at the time. And with Battlestar Galactica, that was Star Wars. And that's the thing with both these characters. That's why I said Richard Hatch's character is basically a male version of Princess Leia. And of course, Dirk Benedict is a combination of Luke and Han. Whereas Buck Rogers has been around as a comic strip, as a serial, all the way back to the 1930s. And it was the inspiration for George Lucas. Both Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and a lot of them serials like that were the inspiration for Star Wars with George Lucas here. So even though Glenn Larson used Star Wars for his inspiration for Buck Rogers as well as Battlestar Galactica, there's a lot about Buck Rogers that is more Star Trek feel to it than Star Wars. And starting with that is Gil Gerard as Buck Rogers. I would never compare Gil Gerard's performance as Buck Rogers to Buster Crabbe from the 30s, or, anyone else who's ever played Buck Rogers. I don't know if anyone else other than Buster Crabbe, but he gives a very unique performance here. He doesn't feel like he's trying to do the serial version of the character. He's trying to put his own spin on the character, and I think he does a really good job at that. His Buck Rogers doesn't feel like it's a ripoff of anything from Star Wars, unlike, like I said, with Battlestar Galactica. And his leading lady is Aaron Gray as Wilma. And she is phenomenal. This is where I gained a huge crush on Aaron Gray when I watched this show, because I always thought she was just so gorgeous, and her attitude that her character had was so awesome. And again, she doesn't feel like she's a ripoff of any of the characters from Star Wars. If anything, she feels like she's got a little bit of Uhura from Star Trek in her. But I think I am going to go with Buck Rogers in the 25th Century on this one, just because as much as I love Richard Hatch and Dirk Benedict's performances, I think Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray just knocked this one out of the park. So I'm going to go with Buck on this one. All right, so let's move on to the supporting reoccurring characters in both of these shows and see how they match with each other. Battlestar Galactica supporting contains Lauren Green, John Colicos, Maren Jensen, Noah Hathaway, Herbert Jefferson Jr., and Anne Lockhart. The supporting cast on Buck Rogers consists of Tim O'Connor, Pamela Hensley, Felix Sela and Mel Blanc, Michael Ansara, Wilfred Hyde White, and Tom Christopher. Now, with Lauren Green in Battlestar Galactica, I just never hardly, I mean, even to this day, it's just hard for me to picture him in this futuristic show playing this character of Richard Hatch's character's father, the commander of the Battlestar Galactica, because I always picture him in Bonanza. He just looks out of place in a space setting and everything. So I was never, I mean, a lot of people might disagree, but I was never fully on board with Lauren Green in Battlestar Galactica. Now eventually I kind of got a little bit more okay with him in there, but I still never really fully embraced him as believable in this setting. John Colicos is our villain with Balthar. And to be honest, I like him as an actor, and I think he's really good, but he doesn't have the commanding voice of a James Earl Jones to pull off this leader of these Cylons, even if he is a de facto leader of them. The rest of the supporting cast in Battlestar Galactica, other than Anne Lockhart, they're okay. None of them ever stood out to me other than Richard Hatch, Dirk Benedict, Lauren Green, John Colicos, and Anne Lockhart. Now on the Buck Rogers side of things, Tim O'Connor was really good in his role in this show. Very likable and made the character believable. But to me, it was always Pamela Hensley who stood out in that first season as Princess Ardala. And she just, I don't understand why, when they got to season 2, they decided to go with the generic villain of the week aspect for season 2 and 3, instead of just having a major overarching villain the way that they had with Pamela in this first season. It just, because she was so good in this role. I just love Pamela Hensley, and I loved her in a later series that she did after this in the 80s with Lee Horsley called Matt Houston. And she is just awesome in this. And her chemistry with Gil Gerard when she's trying to seduce him in these scenes just works so well. She is just... whereas Aaron Gray is the perfect good girl character with a toughness to her. Pamela is her equal in the villain area. And the later seasons always had, big guest stars, except for one, in which it was the space vampire episode, which I think that one was the one that should have been your overarching villain of that following seasons and everything, or season, because just imagine, instead of just one episode, if that space vampire had showed up, and instead of just, seducing and taking control of Aaron Gray's Wilma in that episode, he shows up, goes after Pamela Hensley, who they could have brought back, instead of just ignoring her, and having her character just disappear. But have Pamela Hensley come back and have her being this overarching villain from the first season, and have this space vampire seduce her and take control of her, and then use her in a different way, so she would be a different type of villain than she was in that first season. Her character would have evolved a little bit into a different way. And still, by the mid-season, they could have had that moment where the vampire seduces and takes control of Wilma. And they could have had her as this intercede in Buck's organization that he doesn't know is under the vampire's control. And they could have continued the season with that happening, leading up to the space vampire being defeated by the end of the end of that season. But they didn't do it. And I like Wilfred Hyde White and Tom Christopher. I always liked his character of Hawk in this series. But at the time those characters came in, it did not have a big overarching villain, as I said. And you had all these guest star villains every week. And it just became almost like Buck Rogers became like a space version of Charlie's Angels in a way, because every week in Charlie's Angels, they had, the angels facing off with a different villain, whether it be male or female. And Buck Rogers became the same thing when they got rid of Pamela Hensley. Even though that did upset me, that they didn't do that, I think the pluses of the supporting cast on Buck Rogers outweigh the negatives. So I am going to go with Buck Rogers on the supporting. All right, let's move on to story and see if we can get a clear-cut winner on this one. The story on Battlestar Galactica consists of survivors of the last capital warship, a Battlestar named Galactica, battle against attacks by the Cylons, led through the help of a human traitor, Balthar. The story on Buck Rogers consists of Buck Rogers battles a host of different villains with his loyal love interest, Wilma Deering, and his comedy sidekick, Twiki, including the seductive Princess Ardala. Now, as I said in the supporting, not having a full overarching villain through the whole 3 seasons of the show kind of hurts Buck Rogers. The story on, Battlestar Galactica, a lot of people don't know this, but, don't realize it, but it only lasted 1 season. And then in the 80s, they brought it back for a supposed revival in Battlestar Galactica 80. which again, it only lasted one season. So technically, if you count the 80s, Battlestar Galactica only lasted 2 seasons. But I'll give it credit, but I can't really give it too much credit because it was only one season. The overarching villain was John Colicos as Balthar. So, because of that, because of Buck Rogers not really having that through its entire run and running into that whole, oh, here's a guest villain, oh, here's a guest villain, every week. Yeah, they had some really, good name actors playing these guest villains, with the exception of the space vampire one, which ironically didn't have a top name playing that vampire character. This, with Battlestar Galactica, it, as it runs, it feels like it's got a beginning and an ending, and it feels like, you've got a full overarching thing going on with John Colicos as Balthar, even though I don't, like I said before that, I don't think he is as good a villain as someone like Darth Vader, which, ironically is what Battlestar Galactica is inspired by. But I'm still going to go with Battlestar Galactica on story. All right, so let's move on to the special effects. Battlestar Galactica contains excellent space battle effects via visual effects supervisor John Dykstra. Buck Rogers has fair space effects. The series was more grounded with physical altercations as opposed to space battles. This is another one where Battlestar Galactica has that Star Wars connection and that's the reason it only lasted one season. Because the effects that they used for Battlestar Galactica cost them so much that, they couldn't keep up with the price to keep making the series. So that's why it ended up getting canceled. It wasn't because it was bad ratings, because it had great ratings. It was a success. But it cost the studio far too much money to make. I mean, this series, basically, if you look at it, it has the Hollywood quality special effects going on in it. And think about that. How hard that would be for television to have the exact same kind of effects as a movie, as the movies, So, whereas Buck Rogers, the special effects in here were TV effects. Like I said, it is more akin to Star Trek as a TV series, not the later movies that came out. But it has a lot more in line with that, because Star Trek had space moments in it, but it never had really big space battles and everything like Star Wars. It was more of a grounded series with them, in battles inside the spacecraft or going to different worlds and having battles there. So this one is an easy win here for Battlestar Galactica on this one as far as special effects. Special effects were so good that they caused the series to not last past one season because they were too big for the studio to keep up with. All right, so there we go with another tie, with Buck Rogers winning the first two with the leads and the supporting, and Battlestar Galactica winning the story and special effects part of it. But what do you think of this versus? Do you agree with my assessment of these two shows? Do you disagree? Let me know in those comments down below. And as usual, if you enjoyed this video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to click that bell icon so you can be notified about future videos just like this one. And while you're by the subscribe button, click that join button and become a Dark Knight fan. As a Dark Knight fan, if you are on the Plus plan, you will have the option to be able to go to one of my posts when I'm asking for requests, and you will be able to request a review for a movie or a TV series. And if I ended up doing it on the channel, it'll go up for all members to be able to see on there. Not only that, but you get access to the Dark Knight Films library of content, including TV shows, movies, behind the scenes, featurettes, audio commentaries. There is a plethora of things on Dark Knight Fans Plus. So if you have been on the fence about joining, now could be as good a time as any to check it out. Well, that's the end of another Versus Night. If you missed last week's Versus Night, check out the link up in here. Or if you've missed any of the other Versus Nights, check out our playlist and see anything that you have missed.